Too early in the morning.
Yes. Okay. Then we have today on the agenda the following items. As usual, the news, then the slot of Marcel, open source management for integration of in-supply deliverables to a final product, so product of products. Although I see that Marcel is not yet in, I hope that he will arrive soon. And then, of course, all other business. Regarding the news, of course, you have recognized we have a new meeting home. Thank you to Max from the FSFE to provide us with the infrastructure. Because afterwards of so after the last meeting, I got several feedback that this was very uncommon that one has to register and to make an account and so on. And even I got the information from some participants that Zoom is not possible for them. So this is the reason why we now are with the FSFE and the big blue button, and I think it's fairly good working, or it's quite okay. Or do you have any problems with audio quality or video quality? No. Then yeah.
Not the video quality. I used it during the legal and licensing workshop, and it worked okay. Occasionally, it does actually, you lose the sound, and you have to dial back in. Essentially, it's sort of dial out. Some people lost the mic as well, so just be cautious. If you don't think people can hear you, just dial back in. That's to solve the problem.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the hint. Okay. Then there will be a conference at 12th of May, the OSS 2021. The program is available at this site, and I think I can share it with you. So this is the program. I think the conference is free of charge, as far as I know it. And it's hosted in Lahti, I think, Finland. So what I think it's a one-day conference, but personally I felt there are quite interesting talks. And if you are in license compliance, perhaps this talk might be interesting to you, or this might be also somehow interesting. So that's the next conference, and that's all the news I have currently.
There's also the OW2 conference on the 23rd and 24th of June.
Okay.
And I put the link in the chat.
Oh, cool. Great. Thank you. Further news you want to share? Then now it would be the time for Marcel, but Marcel is not there yet, and now I have a problem. because it was planned that he will do the next slot. So that's okay.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. I hope that he's not ill. So yeah. Then do you have anything you want to discuss and or share with the others?
Just again a reminder: the Open Source Summit, the Linux Foundation, the Open Source Office Summit. That is at the end of September, beginning of October, and I think the current plan is to hold that in person. I think there will be an element of virtual element to it. But that would be another interesting. It's the first time that they've done one sort of that's specifically dedicated to open source Office.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the call for papers is open already.
Is it okay? But this is not the Open Source Summit. They switched to from Dublin to the United States, or?
No, I didn't know that.
So I think I got an email from the Linux Foundation that. Oh, let me check some here. This one. Where is it?
Oh, you're right. The Open Source Summit, it says 27th to 30th of September in Seattle, Washington.
Yeah.
Let me just
Because I think the I think they have claimed that the access to the vaccine is better, or something like that.
Okay, I must admit I missed that. So yes, the Oxford Conference 7 to 29 in Seattle. But it has a virtual element. I think it's so.
I think I will not be able to travel to the United States.
Yeah, no, I don't think our travel restrictions will be lifted by then.
Yeah.
I think to Dublin probably would have been okay, but not to the US.
Yeah, because it's a really long flight.
Hello, good morning. Sorry for being late.
Oh, hi, Marcel. Yeah, we talked about conferences, so no problem, no worries. Yeah, but if there are no more news you want to share, then I think Marcel, it's your turn. What?
Yes, so this is we had already this meeting last week. From the one side, I still do not have slides, but I wanted to continue this discussion about how to handle then this products of products, I called it, I think. Because here we see this setup that at the moment we have very heavily focused on this automation of the development infrastructure. Yeah, and then we have the team that develops their software. At the end, automatically they get the bill of material and their disclosure documents. But also here in our company, and I also observed this in other companies, that they have either internal but also external suppliers that also provide them with disclosure documents. And then the question is, okay, how to handle this? Because this was the initial idea of Software 60, then also to say, okay, let's just import that, and then I can consolidate for my final product. Okay, I put everything together, then click a button, and then get a post compliance bundle for the whole product. And so now, as we discussed last week, the question there is, okay, how can we combine those both approaches? On the one side, having a fully automated CI/CD that produces this stuff, versus then also potentially getting inputs from other sides, because then we have or we observe different paradigms here. So potential paradigm could be, okay, I trust my supplier and directly import this bill of material without additional review, and compile then the final bundle from this input. Or would I use that provided SPDX bomb, whatever, and run through my toolchain again? Because it's automated, it would not hurt that much. It would take some resources and time, but it would not use effort typically, except you have a different interpretation of what your supplier provided to you, and then you need to investigate those gaps. And this is the big question, or the discussion I wanted to have with you. Okay, what would be rather the use case that we would tend to support? Because for me, this is important if we rather heavily integrate both approaches in one, so that I say, okay, I import not directly in the database, but I always go via a rescan and then ingest it in the database. Or is there a bypass where I can directly import stuff from externally into my database? So these are the two things. Why is this important? Because in the second case, if I have merely a database where I import things and have functionality around the database, this would be an extra product in brackets. In the other case, the emphasis would be more on this integration workflow into the data, so that I always have a rescan or whatever, a re-evaluation of material that goes into my database. So that's at least the two sides that I see at the moment. And as we do not have this final reference there, we have two references presented. One from Oliver, that's the one from me, from FOSDEM, but I would like to discuss, okay, how would this big picture would look like. I don't think that everyone has that use case, but we have discussions in the last weeks, more and more people that also have this product use case, and where we have to have a look at it. And especially that would be, and that's what I told to Shane, that's exactly our initial idea of OpenChain. So that I also the initial idea that we said, okay, we have a standard in the chain, and we do not have to, or we can save some efforts, because we do not rescan again and again. And this is also some question in this other paradigm that we say no, anyway we would rescan. So, but at least we have the same infrastructure and could optimize the interfaces, at least, to make that as smooth as possible.
Thank you, Marcel. So we have actually three cases inside our parts. We have the one that you mentioned that actually the supplier provided the bond and we use it there, considering. We have a second case that actually the supplier provides the source code, but we need to do the bond ourselves. And we have the case that actually have our software that you need to do the scanning itself. It's actually, it's all the cases are exists on our MySpace right now.
Yeah, you're right. That's right. I forgot the second one. So when we have immature or potentially immature open source management on supplier side, I would put it, so that we're forced to rescan anyway. Right?
Yeah.
Marcel, I think the next question is, would you trust my results? So if we send in our software components with the results and so on, will you trust them? I mean, what I mean for this that you can reuse and then maybe just skip the scan is that you really trust or know that whatever you get, you can rely on.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard because if I look at scanning, even if you have the perfect and the best tool, you can do so much wrong regarding the parameters on the way on how your source repository is structured or configured. And I think, for example, it could increase, or maybe this is already the case, but for example, if we talk about ORT, if we get the results, it could be very useful if, for example, all the parameters that have been used to run the scan are included in these as well, so that I can clearly see on what happens. And also all the curation stuff and so on. This is also a lot of parameters where you could actually do wrong, although you try to do everything right.
Yeah.
I think the scanning parameters are important, but that's other thing that actually more important than this. Let's put in the reality that we have our built-in softwares. Even if you actually build in the same software, let's say, let's speak in some library, libxml, for example, some companies actually do some patches, and then we cannot identify that source that we scanned uses some extra patches or not. So if you're thinking about, let's imagine a Linux distribution that the resulting library that comes there usually is a lot of patches applied, and then we need to rely on the version and plus the release. It's not exactly the same software at all that we are scanning there. And how actually we can identify this? This is actually a problem.
Sure, that's a problem.
But in this case, I would say that you this is more a problem of contracts with your supplier. I think in any case, you can't really check for 100% accuracy in their documentation. So, for example, if they use any snippets, you might not find them or something like it. So what we do is we have purchasing conditions that our suppliers must fulfill the obligations that they give us a full documentation on their open source components, and so the liability in the last case would pass to them. So this would not be an ideal case if we get a problem with it, but at least we can say, okay, our supplier they gave us the document that they give us full documentation. So if they don't do it, they are responsible.
But it wouldn't be their liability because if they give you a set of packages and then you go and build it and your build system does apply some patches to those builds, then that's something that you have done rather than your supplier provided you with.
Yeah, of course. If you yourself apply patches, then it's your responsibility.
Exactly. So that's the distinction. Is that yes, of course, you can sort of say, give me the full support and build a sort of patches that you expect to use. And if you just follow what they've given you, then yes, I agree with you. It will be their responsibility, and you have a contract to adhere to that. But you then go and use it in your own build infrastructure, and your build infrastructure uses a different, a different compiler, for example, and it results with different libraries being pulled. Then that is definitely an action that you have done.
So you mentioned exactly an interesting thing. So just to draw in a parallel, That's the internal tool that people are working on the CV inside of our company. That they actually want to talk with us about, and of course, the data that we provided, that we can share the data on the same software. And they are explicitly requesting to us, aside other project details, the compiler and other details there that we cannot simply tell based on the version, not even the release there. This information is nowhere available. And then you're right. Sometimes compiled with different compilers and the resulting data is different.
From a compliance perspective, for you on the way out, you need to have the full list that has been used to create the product that you are releasing, not just what your supplier has given you. I think the advantage in the supplier providing you with the packages and the list of packages and the compliance files, you when you build, if you run the scan, you can just do a diff to sort of figure out have things changed, has there been any additional components added, have any libraries being pulled in, and then from that point onwards, you only look for those deltas rather than, so it will, I think there is value in having clarity in the supply chain, but it doesn't remove what you need to do in your organization to back those information. I think we're still a long way away from saying, well, I've received this, therefore it is the full story and I can just rely on passing on the files. But I think organizations for time to come will still have to carry out some degree of due diligence, and I think we need to focus on how can we automate that part of it, because we know that most organizations will continue to do their own due diligence.
I think so. So we have the idea of trusted sources, but there's a requirement that we have at least confidence that they do at least the same quality processes like we do, and we and there might be also an option of let's say an audit or something like that in order to get real confidence. But as far as I know, up to now we do not have any organization listed as a trusted source. So we would also, what we are doing is, I think, so I cannot, so at least from what I know, is to check the deliverable, whether it makes sense, and if you receive, let's say for an example, we are using OpenSSL XYZ, and you get only one license with this library, then of course we know that this is not the whole story. So then it starts really getting let's say cumbersome in order to get the entire information what we need.
And thank you, Oliver. Like you said, you don't have any trusted suppliers yet. I think the problem with that idea is, at least in my experience with our suppliers, we had the problem that we had one time a communication with them, and we woke them up that they have to do their open source documentation, and they did it in some examples really well. But even with the next update, they already gave us outdated information, so they had this one-time process to bring it up to date, and then it was maybe forgotten, or the people had other obligations, and nobody updated their open source documentation, and it was outdated again when we got the next software update. So I think this might be a problem, really trusting a supplier that even if you vetted their process one time, it might be another case a year later when maybe personnel changes or something like it. So I think the idea Sammy proposed, that you have at least a delta comparison of the components, then you can really see if something changed and ask them about it. That's a good idea.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
But this is exactly what my question was then. Okay, what way do we go? Because this paradigm that I get trusted sources or trusted, let's say, SPDX file that was produced blah 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 by this and that company, and I just ingest it into my database. Seems not to be valid at the moment because that could be an idea to say, okay, I have a contract with the supplier. There is some indemnification if they did something wrong in this open source scan. Well, then they have to indemnify us with the costs. If there is something, we just hand it over to our downstream the chain, etc., etc. So this was at least one of the paradigms that I've observed. But now, as we see it, how we really do it, and then additionally, we also have these upcoming requirements of there might be in one of those open source components in a transitive dependency, there might be a component with security vulnerabilities. Then I want to know it by really in detail, even if this is a component from my supplier. So I need this accuracy in this dependency tree that I have my alarms and whatever if there's a security vulnerability, etc. And that brings me, at least at the moment, to a conclusion that, well, I think there is every company will have the need to have all this in their system and not, just having input from a supplier and trust it and then handle it as a black box, but rather the requirement, I want all components that I provide outbound to my customers or users, I want to have traceability, everything. I want everything under my control. I think this is rather the paradigm that I observe at the moment.
So you are treating things like in this way there. If it comes from the binary from the supplier, then at least we need to touch the information to looking for the CVE database and then ask suppliers if actually this is actually valid for them or not. And the second stage, if even doesn't matter supplier us make the things as a source code itself and you need to touch the compiler, then we scan it and we treat it as our responsibility. This is the only way we can see that.
I mean,
go ahead, Sami.
So I was just going to comment. It was an interesting comment about the trusted supplier. I think I would still see that to have somebody designated as a trusted supplier. For me personally, in our organization, I would insist that we do scans for a period of time for everything that we receive from them to validate what they're providing us is that accurate, has the documentation and the relevant license compliance artifacts, have those been updated correctly. That's when I would designate them as a trusted supplier, because if they truly run the process and follow the process, not just the one-time carry out proper due diligence. If they do that over a period of time, you will find that actually every time you do the scan, it matches their results essentially, and that's really where I would designate somebody as a trusted supplier. And that doesn't remove that when you receive these packages, on the way, we still have to do some work, because I mentioned one example where the tools that you're using in your infrastructure might apply patches or might insert other components that you need to and are required to do the compliance for. But also there is another aspect, and certainly that's something I observe very often. We receive packages from a supplier and we only use some smaller subcomponents of those products that we're receiving. So actually, for us on the way out, we don't need to rely on their full compliance artifacts. We have to only use a subset of those, and that will always require an organization to create, because the supplier can't know which portions you're going to use, which portions you're not going to use. So they can't give you these artifacts up front. So you still have to say, okay, we're only using this, therefore these are the applicable licenses, etc. And these are the only artifacts that we need to provide to across the supply chain. So that's another observation that I tend to see, is that there's always going to be some work done within your organization to confirm, are you distributing the full packages, or is it a subset of them? Does your own infrastructure add additional components as part of the build, in which case you also need to take those into account?
Yes, and I think there's you have mentioned it. I think there's another big problem. So if you want to build up trust, or whether you can, let's say, trust the results you are receiving from your suppliers. The problem I see, or a further problem I see, is that there might be a component like a big component like something graphical, and it might contain, so the source code package might contain a lot of different files going under different licenses and so on. And how would you also ask your suppliers, okay, what did you use? So what were your compile options or link options in order to build and produce this library you are actually going to deliver to me? So because if you analyze the entire package, which you can download probably from GitHub, then you will end up in the best case with a superset of the compliance documentation you are receiving from your supplier. So what I wanted to say is that if we want to let's say, design a pipeline of several suppliers to the end customers, I think we need more meta information on the used open source packages, like what really ends up ended up in the delivered binaries. Otherwise, I think it will not be that easy possible in several years to automate then the entire, let's say, how is it called, Wareneingangskontrolle. So the quality check of you have when you receive deliverables from your supplier. What?
That's a good point. Yes, we observed this also. Like one of our examples is FreeRTOS, for example, where you have hundreds of files in the code base, but you potentially only use 3 of it. And then what is it worth that I tell my customer, okay, we're using FreeRTOS under this and that license? Well, yeah, maybe, may not be. he will, as he only gets a binary, potentially he will not know, okay, what portion did we use? And also same way for all the inbound stuff. How shall we judge without knowing the architecture or this selection that we've mentioned?
Yeah, because
so I think I mean, I think we need to divide things into the different types of challenges. I think today one of the biggest struggles that we have when we receive packages from somewhere, or even just go and download packages from somewhere, we sort of we don't know what is in there, so we have to do quite a lot of due diligence to identify every single file and the license that they're applicable to those files, and that's obviously in addition to are we using the full package? Are we using part of this package? So you're right. There's a lot of time spent in doing that. But I think the idea of the trusted supplier or trusted work across the supply chain is that if at least I receive the packages with all that due diligence done already on what I'm receiving, I can then validate that what they have done is correct. So I can check that's the first step, do an audit, and as I said, you do 2-3 months worth of auditing to sort of raise your confidence that that supplier really does update the information in every release that they give us. Then there is that component of, okay, now I've taken it, I now need to take it into my organization. Which components am I using, and what else gets added? Those are things that we would still continue to do. I think the challenge at the minute, we can't trust what is given to us, and we have to do full due diligence on everything that we're receiving. And on top of that, we still have to carry out further due diligence to sort of figure out what is being shipped as part of our products and what else is added as a part of the build.
Is there a deeper problem as well? I think from a legal point of view here, because while you might agree that your supplier has done a great job, it may be that your legal department don't want to actually trust what their legal department has done with their analysis, if you like. And maybe your legal department does not want your downstream people to actually take their word for something on the basis of that might constitute providing legal advice to them, and they should be trusted and accountable. So I'm wondering whether it might be the case where you might believe your supplier's process and recognise they are doing good due diligence, but you still need to do a review to make sure that it passes messed up from your own legal department's view.
Yes, that's also I think another dimension of the problem. Whether these different legal departments things or what is the viewpoint of my own legal department.
Because the SPDX standard is not supposed to contain interpolation as such, and when you've got clear information in open source, then that's okay, but where you've got a combination, and then you have to make an assessment whether license application is compatible with license 1, that's something slightly different.
Yeah, that's true.
But there's rather than being a array of doom with various search on things that's really defined, you've got many different interpretations from different sources all producing the same results, increasing confidence in a common interpretation of combination.
I mean, Steve, your point is very valid, and this is why when I mentioned that I can see that organizations will continue to carry out full due diligence in the foreseeable future. I mean, I would imagine that your department, if you went there and said, okay, we've carried out due diligence, and by the way, this SPDX file that the supplier is giving us matches what our own findings, that will dilute their argument. Well, no, but you still have to continue to do that every time. You know, if you do that 10 times and 10 times the results are exactly the same, then that becomes about, well, actually, this is a waste of time from an engineering or development perspective to carry out this investigation, and it would be also a waste of time of your legal team to go and say, well, actually, their interpretation doesn't match ours, or actually their interpretation the last 10 times matches ours. So that confidence, including within your own organization, can happen over a period of time. But I agree with you. You know, I think we have to sort of think, how can we actually take advantage when people provide us with information to speed up the process that you need to do within your own organization. That's at a very high level. That should be the thinking. What tools can we have if this you know, when I do the scans, for example, can I have my results and compare them very quickly to the supplier results to be able to sort of identify where there are discrepancies? That should be the focus, because that currently a lot of that work is done manually, and actually sometimes we don't even bother to look at what the supplier is providing because we just go and do everything ourselves.
And this is the process view, and that's brought us then, because we're now at the edge of a new decision. We say, okay, now how do we continue? How would we integrate software 360 principle in ORT, or is it different, or how does this all fit together if the most of the end users of our toolchain will rerun it again and again anyway? Yeah, so then we can optimize it in that direction. Whereas if we would follow the other paradigm as a default, then the right decision would be another one. So therefore, this is so decisive for me at the moment. What is the majority of companies or users doing, and what is their paradigm?
I personally think for the foreseeable future, people will continue to rerun scans and rerun that due diligence, and being very practical. If you go the other direction, I think there is a danger that you will lose that option, because people say, well, actually, I don't trust this, therefore I still have to do something, and I still need to go off somewhere else to carry out my due diligence, and then you end up, you know, people not following the process and the integrated process that you put in place. It probably longer term, you probably have to acknowledge that there would be a shift, initially sort of focusing on rerunning things continuously, and then in the future you could look at sort of, okay, can we limit the amount of rerunning that code? Can I sort of can I sort of tell the tools to intelligently sort of bypass certain things? That's how I would see it. And again, I think that focusing on the rerunning has a huge advantage if you are thinking about security, because security vulnerabilities, that is a continuous process. Because, you know, security vulnerabilities might be not being known at the point when you bring it into the organization, but you still need to monitor the vulnerabilities, and as soon as the vulnerability is identified, you need to act. And you can only do that if you have a mechanism and a system that is running things and checking, has any vulnerability been identified. So I'm inclined to head more and more into the optimization needs to happen in the rerunning the process more efficiently within your organization.
So hi, this is Bastian speaking. Maybe I can quickly chime in here, because this optimization is exactly something that we've implemented today already, because we acknowledge that finding security vulnerabilities is an ongoing task, basically. So we can rerun that part anytime as part of our pipeline. What we might not want to rerun every time is the identification of licenses and copyrights, for example, because that does not change, right, as long as the source code doesn't change. So yeah, that's the split I see here, right? So maybe even from a code coming from a trusted supplier, you might not want to rerun license and copyright identification every time, but you might want to rerun security vulnerability checks.
Sebastian, I couldn't but agree more with you. I think that is exactly the right focus. And interestingly, when you talk about the running the license identification, I think again I would go even a step further, which the tools do today already. Is about the delta. So even if the code change, there is a code change, you only look at the deltas because nothing else has changed.
But may I ask a question, because I think I didn't get it correctly, Sebastian. What I understood right now is that you are you need to run something again in order to get the current view of security vulnerabilities. Is this correct? Because we do have another approach, because we have, let's say, an approach which is where you can register components at a service, and then those those components get supervised, and if there is a security vulnerability popping up, you will be automatically notified by that service.
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting approach to basically push instead of pull, right? But that service in the background is doing exactly the same thing, right? That service needs to continuously run checks whether there are at this point in time new discovered security vulnerabilities in your existing components. And if there are new things found, then that information is basically being pushed to the teams, right? So not the teams themselves need to rerun the scans, of course. So from a user perspective, you want to get push notifications. But in the end, the service still needs to run continuous checks.
Yeah, sure. Exactly at the point where I was sitting in front of those two approaches and said, well, how do we get this together? And because I exactly had that point in Oliver when I said, okay, I merely want to know something about security vulnerabilities, then I do typically, you have the gut feeling, okay, it sounds a little bit strange to run a complete scan again just to get this single information out of it. So I would also say, okay, why don't I have a database that just highlights, okay, hey, there's a component issue, blah, blah, blah. And that brought me to this question here. So, but if I have the paradigm that I run those scans continuously anyway, so then I do not have this challenge here to decide which direction. And this is exactly what I wanted to discuss in here, or to start this discussion here. What would be the direction for the future? Potentially also a hybrid model or whatever. But this is exactly what I was thinking of. How should we optimize the whole system in the future if we have only as a edge case that we not run it, or is it the default case that we not run it and just have a database that highlights us with new findings, things like that.
So I only can say what we have. So we have an extra security vulnerability notifying service. So whenever you register a component there, then the component is supervised. Of course, they are running lots of crawlers and other things in the background in order to check whether there are new vulnerabilities popping up. But this is done then. So this is let's say some kind of fire and forget. So notifying the component, the version, and then receiving the entire lifetime security vulnerabilities for that component in that version whenever they pop up. So here we do not care about that anymore. Regarding the license situation, as Sebastian said, this does not change for a certain component in a certain version. The only thing which really might change is that depending on the build pipeline, depending on the used, if it's a compiled component or a compiled language, that was used to implement those components, you will end up with a certain or with different subsets of the entire, let's say, copyright notices and the entire licenses. But in the end, if the component was analyzed once in its completeness, you always can be sure that if there is no external patch applied to that component, but only compiled in different ways, you will always end up with a complete subset of the complete analyzed source code of the component. Or?
Yeah, we are planning to go into something similar to what Oliver said. So just two things on the separate. For if actually the source code enters on the CI and then it's exactly the same, so just let's say the first analysis of the package is matching the same that exists today, we don't need to do the compliance scanning again. It already exists there, it's already registered there. But for the side of the CV service, they are running for each and every single build. So basically, they know what components is there, they check it, and then do a push and pull notifications of the CVs for the database. So basically, for the CV, it's running all the time. For the compliance, can only want the basic component changes for some reason there.
So it's interesting, Oliver, but we definitely only rerun the compliance if a new product is going to be shipped out of the door. So for example, we typically do sort of every some products every 30 days, some products every 90 days, new release, and if while engineering are doing the development, we sort of encourage them to do identification, but actually the focus is when they know that the code is going to be frozen for the next release. That's where they have to rerun the license compliance identification process, because they may not ship anything else in between, because they might think, oh, I might be using this, and then they change their mind and do further modifications, and end up using something different. So the way we track is each product release, we have versions for those, and for every version there is a requirement to rerun the license compliance process. For security, we still need to continue to run continuously the vulnerabilities, because as we discussed earlier, that can happen at any time. So we need notification when there is a security vulnerability identified.
Yeah, I think so. Probably we have, regarding the license compliance, a similar approach, because when there is a product or a project which wants to use or which intends to use a certain open source component, the compliance, so the license identification, the copyright, and so on, it starts, and when usually the entire component is analyzed. And then, of course, when there's going to be the product release, then the license information of all integrated components is compiled together with the product developers, say, for asking or identifying, okay, which files were used to produce the binaries and so on and so on. But this is only in my opinion, a certain view on the entire license situation of the entire component. But of course, this will be then, this is the work then, it has to be done in the compliance process. for product releases. But I think we have to postpone the discussion because it's already 1 minute past 10. So thank you for this very interesting and very lively discussion. If you have time and you are still interested, perhaps you have time to dial in the afternoon session to continue the discussion. And if not, I wish you a pleasant day, and I'm looking forward to talk to you the next time. By the way, this is a permanent meeting room, so whenever you surf to that address and log in with that conference number, you will be present in this conference. Okay, then.
Great. Thank you.
You probably have heard what Max and me were talking about, so I do not have the recording yet of the morning session. I think I have to reach out to Max Mehl, asking for the recording. Okay, so the agenda for today is as follows. News, then Marcel had the request to discuss about the open source management for integration of end supplied deliverables to a final product, so product of products. From end products and FOSS compliance bundles to one product and one FOSS compliance bundle. So in the morning meeting we discussed a little bit what are the different approaches and how do parties discussing in the morning meeting tackle this kind of problem. Regarding the news, I updated the news compared to the morning meeting. So we have, of course, you have recognized it, the new meeting home. And thank you to Max Mehl from the Free Software Foundation for providing this. Then there will be a conference next week, which is called Open Source 2021. I think it's hosted in Lahti, Finland. The program, it's a one-day conference, and the program looks like this. Give me a second. So there, here there is a talk about open source compliance within the FASTEN project. I think the FASTEN project is a European funded project, and there are other talks. So if you are interested, I think you can register, and the registration is free of charge, as far as I know. And of course, it's an online conference. Then in the morning meeting, Nico mentioned that there will be the OW2 conference, and it will take place on 2 days. And the program is available via this link. Here there's the program, but I do not want to go through the entire two days. So if you have here is something you find interesting, then please register. I think it is also free of charge, but I'm not quite sure. So I did not really find an information whether it's free of charge or not. So it's up to you to check out. And finally, when we talked about the Open Source Summit Europe, so the Open Source Summit Europe will take place end of September in Seattle. So not in Europe anymore. Perhaps only this year due to the Corona situation. The call for papers for presentation is still open and it closes at 13th of June. Sami in the morning mentioned that there will be also a possibility to join in online to this Open Source Summit Europe. I was not able right now to check the conditions in more detail. So the only thing I can provide you is that the call for presentations or papers is still open. And it will not take place in Dublin, Ireland. Sorry for that. So that's the news I can share with you. My question to you is whether you have more news you want to share. Obviously not. Then, since Marcel is not there right now, I try to summarize what we discussed in the morning meeting. Because I did not make any notes during the meeting because it was recorded, so I was lazy. So Marcel said that, or wanted to discuss the scenario. Okay, you have a supplier, and this supplier delivers software to you, and you integrate this piece of software in your own product and deliver this product then to your customers. So the typical supply chain scenario, yeah. And I think his question or his concern was mainly how do you or how can this be handled? So first whether you can trust the FOSS compliance artifacts you were receiving from your suppliers, or whether you are doing the scanning and analysis work on your own based on the information you receive from your supplier. And I think that were the main questions. And then we had, let's say, other questions which were raised in this context. So how can you really determine what kind of licenses apply to the delivery of your supplier? Because you also need more information, which, for example, if you have compiled products or product written in a compiled language, which compiler is used, which compiler switches were used, and so on, because all these kind of infrastructure things might also influence the FOSS compliance artifacts or the content of those artifacts. Yeah, this was the discussion. I think there was more or less common understanding that it would be really nice, really nice if if a supplier can be seen as a trusted source. But the question is how to get to the state of a trusted source. And I think Sami did a very valid statement saying, okay, the only way probably is to check several times the deliverables in regard to the compliance artifacts, whether these deliverables of the supplier matches the own applied compliance work or not, and if those deliverables match the own findings, then for several times, then it could be this kind of supplier can reach the state of being a trusted source. Knowing that this might change when people at the supplier organization change their job. Yeah? For example, if a lawyer who was working for that supplier decides to leave the company, and there will be a new lawyer who might not be that experienced as the lawyer before. The compliance bundle might differ, might or might not. It depends, I think. And this is this was one thing, and the comment, more or less understanding was that you have to do more or less the compliance work of the deliverable again. If you then tend to deliver this thing from the supplier as part of the product. Did I summarize this somehow correctly or not, Sami? What do you think?
I think you did. I mean, and I think, to be fair, I think the question from Marcel was, where do we want to focus moving forwards? And I think the discussion was around, is it sort of, do we focus around making sure that the scans, for example, or the compliance work is run again and again overnight, or whatever period you decide within your organization, if you're asking your teams to sort of run and do the identification themselves, or whether we focus on better integration with the supplier own supplied materials, so that you don't have to duplicate the effort. And I think there was a general consensus that actually for quite some time to come, many organizations will have to do quite a bit of in-house work, and it would be more beneficial to focus on the automation and better integration of the tools within your own organization to avoid duplication of effort. I think the other thing that was worth mentioning from this morning was can you 100% rely on a trusted supplier? And I think the feeling was that we're not there yet, and therefore many of the organizations will continue to carry out their own due diligence. So it is best to focus on that automation, making it easier for your developers to accomplish the compliance more easily within your own infrastructure.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Sami, for summarizing this. So, Robert, can you please speak up a little bit, because you are hard? It's So your voice is very low, or the volume is very low. I hope.
Okay, I've switched on to the microphone, so that I would like to raise another topic. Did we talk this morning about source code delivery versus binary deliveries from that supplier?
I think it was touched a little bit, but I do not know exactly what you are referring to. So the scenario where a supplier delivers only source code, or whether another scenario where the supplier delivers only a binary with perhaps a source code bundle of the integrated open source packages which require source code availability.
This would be the legal requirement, that he at least delivers the source code of the copyleft affected parts. But this is something we do not know if he does this correctly or not. And this is something which we would like to verify, of course. But if it's only a binary delivery, it would be very hard to detect, at least in my experience, it would be very hard to detect all the open source contents of that bundle, specifically for permissive licenses.
Agreed, but interestingly, Robert, we did talk about it will have to be with suppliers. You will still have to rely on legal obligations in terms of legal agreements with your supplier. So, for example, if you are downloading, if you're receiving software that is precompiled by a supplier, you then still have to rely on your legal agreement with the supplier that they must attest and confirm that all the list of open source that they're declaring to you that is within that package are accurate, so that you can complete your own compliance. So we touched very briefly that need will still continue to happen. We do have where our own developers are just going and grabbing open source packages that are available, from somewhere like GitHub, for example. As an organization, we have a policy that says you must download the source code and you must be able to recreate the binaries that you are downloading. So we do that's a policy that we have set out to our own developers.
Okay, so for internal open source usage, but if you get software from a supplier, that supplier might have a different policy. So
yeah, it would have a different policy, because it would be that in the contract we would put an obligation on that supplier. For example, that they must declare all the open source components, and for any copyleft components, they must also provide us with the open source packages. In fact, we do have part of our due diligence. We also ask the supplier further questions. How do these open source copyleft components interact with the rest of the software? Because we may not agree with their analysis that the copyleft obligations don't extend beyond their software package that they're delivering to us. So we have further focus around things like how is it used, how does it interact with the rest of the software, is it an independent module? These are the types of questions that we typically ask, as well as obviously you must provide us with all the copies of the licenses and the sources that have been used.
I think it would make much sense to talk to the supplier how he is getting this kind of information and how it's creating this disclosure documentation.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if the, let's say, parts of the reference tooling are being used, then it's easy to talk about how to clarify items and how to have a common format to exchange data. And this will be easy. And like you said in the morning, if you watch this for a couple of releases, how documentation is being changed over the releases, which kind of information is being changed. If, for example, if there is a new version integrated and some copyright statements change, then you will get a feeling if you can trust these work or not.
But actually, I mean, it's back to Marcel's point from this morning. I think he wanted to understand, should we be focusing on better integration of the tools when you like SW360, for example, within your own organization, that is much better integrated so that it runs, automatically and produces results automatically, etc. And we said, yes, that actually is the critical direction that we should take, because actually, if you yourself are using these tools, you can then dictate to your supplier that they should be using the equivalent tool, so their results will match what you are doing. So, and until such time that we have tools that are seamlessly integrated, I think we'll see less adoption with suppliers, because it's a hard job.
Of course. By the way, I'm current. So right now, another thing came into my mind regarding. So if you have a supplier who integrates GPL licensed software and is deliverable, do you have? So this is an open question. Do you have a format specified how they describe the build environment in order to enable you to, let's say, recreate the binaries out of the GPL licensed source code packages? So do you here have a certain template or?
I mean, we have, and it's something that I spoke about before in previous meetings. We have this concept of what we refer to as use case. So we ask how the software, for example, when you talk about if you tell me that I've actually used GCC to build this software, therefore some GPL provisions might apply. We then ask, so in the binary that is created, what ends up in that binary that you're supplying to us? So we ask this. We have this concept of use case, and in the use case we say, okay, distribution in binary form, and the license is GPL with exception, for instance, and we also say, can you provide with a full list of all the components that are distributed that are subject to open source? So we go to that sort of use case, because without knowing that use case, if you tell me, well, I'm just giving you GCC alongside these deliverables, that's completely different to telling me that actually I've used GCC to compile this software that I'm supplying to you, and by the way, I know that the runtime libraries are already statically linked here. So we rely on that sort of type of use case to specifically determine, is this okay or not? And we do that for all inbound components, regardless of whether they're open source or whether they are proprietary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost the same questionnaire that we ask, and typically we ask our engineering team, can you tell us how they would have built, and they go and have a discussion with that supplier to discuss, okay, what else has been used in this package that we're receiving.
Okay, I understand. Further comments and additions on that?
I'm not sure, but I think it's even maybe it's not mandatory, but it's at least practice to provide the instructions for the lift. In some licenses, it's mentioned already the instructions.
Yes, so we usually. So, but I can only speak for my organization. Usually, when we do, or when we have integrated components which contain files which are licensed on LGPL or GPL, because I think LGPL has the same requirement.
Mm-hmm.
We are providing a file which is called build instructions.txt, where it's described, okay, use for compiling those files, please use let's say, what can I say here? I'm just looking at something that a certain version of a development tool has to be set up, and then what kind of commands shall be or have to be applied, and which kind of here, for example, a certain Python interpreter.
Yeah, the recipes. I was going to.
Yeah, exactly. So
provide the recipe. Yeah, exactly. So the recipes to rebuild, basically. Can you provide?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, we do that, and again, it is all in the policy. So, for example, with our suppliers, if there is any copyleft, we do ask for copies of the sources there and then. We don't rely on the offer. And in fact, on the way out, we also have a policy where we say, if you are distributing any copyleft components, to our own engineering team, we dictate that they must make the sources available alongside whatever we're supplying. So for example, I don't know, let's say you're going to provide somebody with a version of GCC specifically to be used in building, for instance. We say provide the compiled GCC as well as the sources, the equivalent sources, immediately at the point of distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't want to have this obligation to look back and think, oh, which version did we actually use for this one? So we just want to fulfill that obligation straight away at the point of distribution.
Yes. I totally agree, because every other thing is a nightmare.
Exactly. And we've had some challenges. So people, for example, if they're creating some tardballs for delivery, they say, well, this is just too big. And we said, fine, create a separate tardball for the sources and just release it separately and make it available somewhere on our delivery mechanism so that people can access it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So alongside with the binary and
Yeah.
Also, for GPL3 with router exception, you need to make sure that the GPC compliant build processes be used.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to security and vulnerability analysis.
Yes.
And I think there was some common understanding that the security and vulnerability analysis has to be performed more frequently or traced more frequently than license compliance, because license compliance will not change if the source code does not change or vulnerability will not change. But still, there might be new security vulnerabilities discovered over time.
Yeah.
Are there any good approaches with regard to tooling to trace security vulnerabilities? In this reference tooling?
Currently, we do not have here some recommendations, because we said, oh, let's focus first on this compliance work, and then let's broaden the view to and go for security or code quality or other things which are also of importance. But for the time being, we are still focusing on this compliance topic, and so we do not have here certain recommendations at hand saying, okay, this is a nice open source license to do or something like that.
I think it's called solving one challenge at a time, because the challenges are just far too big if you look whichever way you look. But Robert, I mean, I'll be very frank and honest here. We do use commercial tools for the security vulnerability monitoring, and even with the commercial tools, they vary significantly. So we still use a mix of commercial tools to do that, and there is a bit more work now. So certainly within our company, to look at, can we have a sort of a more unified approach. At the minute, I think for security, we tend to, different business groups tend to do different things, because the level of risk is slightly different. So for example, business groups that provide cloud services, for example, that is different to where you ship an actual product out of the door. So the sort of the monitoring of the security and the vulnerabilities and the frequency at which you run those reports may vary.
Yeah, of course, it depends on the attack.
It depends on the product, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
yeah. But yeah, I don't see much integration. Certainly, and this is, I think it was not this morning, but it was a couple of weeks ago. I think we did mention that some there doesn't seem to be much of an overlap yet in many organizations. Security teams seem to be slightly different to the open source office organization, and that's certainly true within ARM so far.
I fully agree, and the reason why I'm asking is because we are also using the tools for security vulnerabilities, and we have the same problem. And I fully agree that solving this one problem with license compliance is already a big task. But yeah. I see that often in my organization, people still approach the open source team to also kind of at least assist with security vulnerability analysis, because it's related.
I agree, and I think there is also an added benefit with open source. I think and with open source Office, certainly we have more experience as to how that impacts customers. I think with security, I think a lot of certainly the work that has been done in many organizations, it was more focused around the security of your environment rather than what is the security in this product that you are shipping. I think there is a shift now where they say, well, hang on a second, but you do this analysis and scanning from a compliance perspective and checking that what is in your product that you're shipping or hosting, whatever, if it's a cloud service, that sort of conforms and with any obligations. So there is more and more sort of thing, but you could surely also run security alongside, and you should surely be the same team responsible for the security of that product.
I think this shift came specifically because a lot of very prominent cases happened in the past.
Yeah.
The public view was very much more visible to
Correct.
a wider range of people. So people become more aware of them.
Agreed.
By the way, one question for my own curiosity. So I found the statement very interesting you made. So as long as the source code is the same, the license compliance information will remain the same. You can also, I think, extend the statement to security vulnerabilities, because as long as the source code stays the same, you will end up, or you will have the same set of security vulnerabilities there. It's only a matter of getting knowledgeable about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is the monitoring. I think the monitoring aspect is what is different between the two. I think with the security, you're expected to continuously monitor when a vulnerability is identified, whereas with license compliance, well, if the source code is the same and the use case is the same and the license is the same, then nothing has changed. So therefore, from a compliance perspective, I wouldn't expect to see any change. We certainly have this concept that even when source code has changed, provided the scan result remains unchanged, and how we're using the open source package remains unchanged, and the license is the same, you don't need to go for a legal review. It can be automatically approved in our system because no risk has increased. The compliance is exactly the same. Obviously, with the compliance, the only thing that changes when you distribute a new package is that the source code or the equivalent source code will need to be updated, and we put that requirement in that you must provide the equating for the equivalent source code that has been used.
Do you have a gut feeling how often it happens with, let's say, security fix that the license situation changes?
I have not seen it. In general, with security vulnerabilities, they get fixed, but I don't see that they would rush to make any changes to how it's licensed. In fact, typically, certainly with open source, the changes are made so quickly that they wouldn't have time to make any other significant changes, like the license, for example. I would say in general it is really a quick fix, and they try to minimize any other implications. So they don't make significant functional changes because they don't want to disrupt sort of how you're integrating it, because again, you might have to ship your product the next day once you've received the patched security fix.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, those things are being fixed by a patch. I think it is a very common case that the license cannot change. Maybe if a new version will be released and those fixes are integrated as well, and there was a license change planned, maybe then yes. The copyright information might change, for example, if the patch was edited by a new person. Maybe we would like to have this copyright, and then some information might change. That could be after the license.
So I would say, yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and like I said, I think it's where there is security vulnerability in general, which is what I would expect, is that you keep all the other factors the same because you don't want to cause further disruption. When it's big, when it's a big security vulnerability.
Yeah. I would have thought in the same direction, so that for a security fix, the focus will be very narrow in order to get the thing fixed and not doing other things around. So I also would expect that the license situation, and even I think from a practical point of view, even I think the copyright or the set of copyright notices will probably or most probably not change, because security fix probably will be applied by a person who is either the subtree maintainer or already a knowledgeable person within the open source project, who has already let's say, or is already listed as a copyright owner. Or I would hardly, or I can hardly imagine a case where a newbie provides a security fix to an open source component. What do you think?
I think if some engineer discovers a vulnerability and provides the fix, that's a newbie. If there's, that's very often the case. Just to add something.
If I think about it, we had that case that one of our employees was submitting it was not a vulnerability fix, but a fix to a specific open source.
Okay. Yeah. For a for a normal bug fix, I totally agree that a newbie, so that this is a very usual scenario. But for a security, I'm not quite sure. But of course,
it's an easy case like a or something.
Yeah, because we always have this discussion about, okay, what happens in case of there's a hotfix, and this hotfix has to be integrated and delivered as soon as possible.
But then the source code changes. My statement was about if you don't have any idea about what it is as a component, then you don't have any guarantee that this will stay the same in the next week or even the next week. So this might really quickly change with regard to licensing. There might be some discovery that the license was not analyzed correctly, and this changes even if the source code was not changed. So there was some license rework done with Linux code, for example, where in some versions they verified licenses not correctly, and this was then fixed in I think version 4.19 or something. There was this talk last week about that, and this can happen, of course, but
it's just the frequency in which it happens. I mean, we generally take the approach that if something like this happens, we generally correct the compliance file in the release of the next version of the product. And typically, our products, as I said this morning, are versions are released every 30 to 90 days. So rather than retrospectively going and fixing older versions of the product, because in general, we stop distribution of older versions once we release a new version of the product.
I think also with regard to the risk,
yeah,
it's much lower.
Correct.
The security risk is much higher than the license risk. But if it comes to the lawsuit, no judge would probably say, okay, but you ordered this license wrongly. If you did your due diligence, then you have any substance, I would say. But
yeah, you've done reasonable effort to analyze, and something has not been foreseen, and again, we generally take the view that provided you have taken steps to correct this in the next version, then that would be showing that you always had the intent to comply with the applicable licenses.
Yes. Is there further topics?
Not for me.
Okay, then I think we can conclude, or can nearly conclude the meeting. The next meeting will be in 14 days. Up to now, I did not have now selected a topic. I will circulate the invitation latest by Friday this week, and then we will have also a topic, or one main topic listed there for the meeting at 19th of May. So thank you all for this very interesting discussion, and I wish you a nice evening, because we are all from Europe. and yeah, stay healthy, and I'm looking forward to talk to you again. So thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.